and murder them with a sword. Okay? And this is known as the Potawatomi Massacre. It occurs in 1856. And what the Potawatomi Massacre does is it inaugurates the beginning of a shooting war in Kansas between, on the one side, free soilers and abolitionists, and on the other side, anti-slavery, okay, anti-slavery settlers. So starting in 1856, starting in the aftermath of the Potawatomi Massacre, okay, there's violence off and on throughout Kansas, okay. By 1861, more than 50 people in Kansas have been killed in clashes between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers. Okay? Kansas becomes known as Bleeding Kansas. Okay? Every couple of weeks, you can open your newspaper, okay, and there will be coverage of the latest fighting that's taken place in Kansas. Okay? Yeah?
How many people were killed?
About 50. Okay, now, so what's happening in Kansas in the 1850s helps to focus the nation's attention on the issue of slavery. Okay? Now, the following year, in 1857, the United States Supreme Court hands down a really, really important decision. A decision that helps bring the nation one step closer to civil war. Okay? 1857. And this decision was known as the Dred Scott decision.
Oh, I remember.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Dred Scott decision. And it's about, yeah.
In 4th grade, we did Missouri State Fair.
Yes.
And yeah, so my project was the old courthouse, so we made up a song, and it was about Dred Scott, and it was so cool.
Wow. Wow.
Should I sing it? Well, part of it.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Once there was a famous case in the old courthouse. It did take place. It shook our nation to the core and brought us closer to the Civil War. Dred Scott, Dred Scott, was he a slaver, was he not? And then there's something about Supreme Court Justice Roger P. Taney said in slavery he shall remain. And
Okay, yeah, that's it in a nutshell, right there. Thank you. It's one of the most famous cases in Supreme Court history, and it involves a slave from Missouri, a slave named Dred Scott. And that is Dred Scott right there. Okay, Dred Scott was a slave from Missouri. Okay, and what he does is, starting in the 1840s, he goes to court to sue for his freedom. Okay, so in the 1840s, Dred Scott goes to court with his lawyers to sue for his freedom. And he's not only suing for his freedom, but he's suing for the freedom of his wife, Harriet, and right here, and his 2 daughters. Okay. This was a big case. And in fact, it made national headlines. This is from a newspaper from 1857. Okay, so the whole country followed the Dred Scott case.
Is this in the north?
No.
What state is this in?
Where was Frank Leslie's? It says, I think we're going back to Congress in this Southern District of New York. So it looks like it was published in New York. Okay? Now, how did the Dred Scott case make it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court? So here we need to take a step back to the 1830s and explain the background for the case. Okay? So, what happens is that in the 1830s, Dred Scott, Dred Scott was a slave living in Missouri. And in the 1830s, Dred Scott is taken by his owner, who is a doctor in the U.S. Army. Dred Scott's owner takes Dred Scott from Missouri, which was a slave state, okay, takes him to Illinois, which was a free state, and then takes him right about here on the map. Okay, this is listed as unorganized territory. Okay, it was the northern part of the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, and as such, this territory where Scott was taken to by his owner was covered under the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and 1821. That is, at the time Scott was taken to this territory right here, slavery in this territory, all throughout here, was forbidden by the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and 1821. That is, and here's the Missouri Compromise line right here, 3630. So, the Missouri Compromise barred slavery north of the line 3630 all throughout this territory. And it was right in here where Scott, as a slave, was taken by his owner. Okay? So, Scott and his owner come back to Missouri, come back to the slave state. And in the 1840s, Scott goes to court in St. Louis. He goes to court, and actually the place where he goes to court is in the old courthouse downtown, right next to the arch, right next to the river. That's where he goes to court. And he says, under the laws of the United States, I should be free, and my wife should be free, and my children should be free. And this is basically the argument that he presents. Okay? Yes, yeah, thanks.
Thomas?
Yes.
After he was taken to the unorganized territory,
Mhm.
he came back to St. Louis for the court case.
Yeah, yeah. So he's back in the slave state of Missouri.
While they were,
And while he's back in the slave state of Missouri, he goes to the courthouse in St. Louis to sue for his freedom. Yeah.
while he was in the unorganized territory, did his owner like treat him as a slave stuff? Like were they enslaved in that area?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why would his owner like take him to these slaves?
Well, I guess the owner just expected that, his owner, I think, expected that he could have him as a slave in these territories. So I guess the owner just expected that he could do that, and he wouldn't have to surrender Scott as a slave. I mean, he wasn't anticipating that the slave eventually at some point would file suit in court saying, oh, I should be free because of that. Yeah.
Why did Dred Scott wait till they got to Missouri to file his owner?
Yeah. I'm not really sure of the motivations. That is why he decided to wait until 1840 to file suit. I don't know. I don't know why there was that gap. That's a good question. That's a good question.
Because once he's in a free state, that would seem to make more sense to file also against his owner.
Yeah. It may have been that he just wasn't thinking in those terms, and that it might have been. I mean, I'll have to. I can look this up and see exactly what the chain of events was. But it might have been that when he came back to Missouri, he had a chance to think things over and say, hey, wait a second, I was taken into territory where slavery is outlawed. Doesn't that mean something? Doesn't it have some kind of significance? So I don't know why he waited until 1840 to file suit. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, like from when I was like younger, his owner was like kind of a relatively nice guy, I think, and he waited until after he died.
Okay.
And then the wife was planning to separate the family. So it was like a big deal, so then he went to court. I'm not positive, but I
Okay.
think that's what it is.
Well, that would make sense. Yeah, because by the time the case winds up at the Supreme Court, Dred Scott's owner is dead. So, I mean, he's still a slave. He's owned by someone else, but the original owner is dead by that point. So that may have had something to do with it. Okay. Now, what was Dred Scott's argument? Okay. Scott's argument, the argument presented by Scott and his lawyer. Okay. And it's basically this. Scott went to a free state, Illinois,